Welcome back. You're listening to the discussion Federal Work and Cyber Risk, Two Sides of the Same Coin, sponsored by Menlo Security on Federal News Network. I'm your host, Jason Miller. My guest today is Jack Miller, the head of Global Professional Services for Menlo Security. Now, Jack, before break, we started talking about this idea of zero trust. I brought it up. Every security conversation we have has to be around zero trust. So let's start there. We've talked a lot about that's not a tool, it's a framework, it's not a silver bullet. We've heard all those things before, but how does zero trust fit into this broader discussion about remote work and understanding where the threat's coming from?
Yeah, zero trust is a really interesting one. I mean, it's a phrase we've talked about for a lot of years, and quite frankly, from my perspective and experience, and I spent 16 years as an enterprise CISO at 4 multi-billion-dollar organizations, right? So it's the concept at a really high level is that, I need to understand if I trust someone, I need to understand if I trust something, right? And how much I can trust before I interact with that person or that asset. So, an easy way to think about it would be kind of like in the federal government space, top secret, right? Or secret. If you don't have the sufficient level of trust, you're not going to be able to have access to that type of information. So for personnel purposes, the way zero trust would be achieved would be that the FBI and other organizations would go in and do background checks, and they would look back, right? So who is this person? Who is Jack Miller? What has he done throughout his life and his career? And try to decide, how much can we trust him? What level of trust can we give to him? And they may come back and say, you know what, we trust him a lot. We give him access to everything, or well, we trust him a little, so we'll give him access to some stuff, but maybe not the nuclear codes or something like that, right? So the problem with that approach, even with individuals, is that it's based on a point in time. So you do the background check, you check, and let's imagine you have full access to all the information to do a proper background check. You come up with a determination of, well, Jack is totally trustworthy. I can give him access to everything. But maybe a week, a month, 2 months later, a year later, 2 years later, right? Things change for me, and maybe I shouldn't really be as trustworthy, but I still have that level of access, right? So that's why you'd have to go back, and you'd have to do, re-ups on your clearances, right? And have those background checks re-performed. So when we shift over to the technical world, and we start looking at it from a standpoint of computers and the systems that we interact with, those systems are having millions of interactions a day. So they're continually changing. So that same problem really gets compounded in that even if you're able to properly assign the right level of trust to a computer or a website or something like that, it's at any given point in time. And all that happens over time is trust goes down. Trust usually doesn't go up over time because it's that one bad thing that runs on the computer that lowers the level of trust. The other two big problems with the technical implementation challenges with implementing this approach to zero trust is that, one, it doesn't scale. I mean, I remember back from the early 2000s in trying to implement this. It was kind of before they called it zero trust, but I'm sure a lot of people on the listening to this will remember, right? Things like Tunnel Guard, where the idea was, well, look, we're going to give VPN access to this employee when they're remote. So I want to interrogate their laptop before I let them to connect. So I can see, well, do they have the latest patches applied? Do they have the latest AV DATs installed and all that kind of stuff? The problem was that, from anyone that tried to go down this path, the infrastructure to support it quickly became just a cluster, right? For lack of a better term. I mean, well, this person's got this version of the operating system. This person's got this, and everybody was a little bit different. So now, well, where do we have to look for that artifact to determine the level of trust? Are all in different places, or what artifact are we looking for? And, so that was one problem that made it not scale well. The other issue is that approach is based on this concept that we can accurately determine the level of trust of a person or entity. And the challenge with that approach is that we don't know what we don't know. So if I'm looking at a website and I'm trying to decide, look, is this website, can I trust it? Can I let my employees connect to this website? I don't know necessarily what the latest, indicators of attack or indicators of compromise are to look at, right? I don't know necessarily what the latest vulnerability is. There could be a 0-day to see if there's a patch applied. So if I don't know all of these things that are really relevant to the trust conversation, then if I'm trying to assign trust, I'm just taking a stab in the dark. And the majority of the time I'm going to miss. And so if you step back a little bit, right, and this is kind of what I kind of call the zero trust conundrum, right? Or modifying our approach. It's really important we always include least privilege access into the zero trust conversation, because that's the whole reason we're trying to establish a level of trust so we can determine how much access to give, right? So when we determine level of access, we base it on a couple things. One is, how much do I trust you? And the other thing is, do you need to have access to this to be able to do your job, right? We have to look at both of those. So by implementing a process like isolation, we can restrict access. So what happens today when people go to the internet, we give them far more access that they need to have to be able to do their job, right? So the first thing is access to do their job. Well, do they need access to this website or do they not need access to this website, right? It's social media. They don't have any reason to access that for their job. Don't allow them access, right? Least privilege. But the next step is, I'm giving them access, but what level do they really need to do their job? Does that website on the internet really have to be able to run code on the local desktop for that employee to do what they're trying to do? Or can we let the code run somewhere else so we kind of remove the risk? So what we're really saying is that for most of our internet interactions, we can restrict access down to a point with isolation where it suddenly doesn't matter that much if we can't establish a level of trust. Right. So let me give you an example I always use. And I'm sure it's somewhat accurate, but I kind of make it up, but I think it tells a good story, right? So if we go back in time to the Wild West, we had a situation where these bank robbers would always come riding in on horses and rob banks, right? So they come riding in, they hop off the horse, they come in the bank, they pull out their gun, they go up to the teller and they say, give me all your money. Well, what's the teller going to do? The teller's going to give them all the money as fast as they can and hope that they don't get shot, right? So banks are losing all this money. So what do? They said, well, we need to implement some controls. So let's hire a security guard who's armed and put him there in the bank. So they did this. And, at that point, that was a deterministic control, right? So the security guard would stand there, maybe out in front of the bank, and would look at somebody riding up. So someone comes riding up on a horse, maybe wearing a long duster and looks kind of shady. And so the security guard, is thinking, well, I don't know if I want to trust this person, right? Maybe they pull out the wanted pictures, right? And they look at that. Well, does this guy match anybody on the wanted pictures, right? It doesn't, and that's how they determine, should I let this person in the bank or not? Well, what happens when it's a brand new bank robber? What happens when it's a grandmother or someone in disguise that comes up? The security guard's not going to know, and they're going to let them in the bank. Once they're in the bank, right, now they have the same access to the teller. So somewhere along the line, somebody invented bulletproof glass. And they said, hey, look, I have a great idea. We're giving these people far more access than they need when they come in the bank to be able to make a deposit or a withdrawal. If we could put bulletproof glass between the teller and the customer, and maybe then put little holes in it, just enough, a little slit underneath it to be able to talk through it and hear and be able to pass the money back and forth underneath. Right now, if the deterministic control fails, I don't say we turn our deterministic controls off. They're always still good to have because they help us understand the threats we're up against. But if it fails, and that grandmom comes into the bank who looked innocent and walks up to the teller and pulls out a gun and says, give me all of your money, right? The teller says, no, I'm not going to do it because I've taken away your access. I'm only giving you enough access to make a legitimate withdrawal or deposit. I'm not giving you enough access to be able to shoot me and steal my money, right? And so that's the approach we want to take here. By isolating these websites when our employees go to them, it eliminates the whole need of trying to interrogate the website to determine, is this website good? Is this website bad? Has this website been compromised, right? And it just says, you know what? I'm going to let you go to this website because I'm going to do it in a way that the website can't hurt you.
I love the Old West analogy. You're absolutely right. It took somebody somewhere to go. Instead of the bars, right? Maybe we should do something more.
Right.
And I think in many ways, that's what
I
agencies
need to add the bars. I need to add the bars to my analogy. That's a good one, right? Because, that stopped him from coming through, but it didn't stop him from holding up a gun, right?
Right. You can plenty of space between the bars to put the gun.
Right.
So I think the other piece though is and you brought this up, is you have to find the balance of restricting access, but not do it so much that you take away their jobs and make their jobs hard to do, because that will lead them down a path to the shadow IT and finding workarounds. Well, you don't let me do it on my work computer, I'll do it on my home computer. Well, but then I bring a document into my work computer because I email it to myself, and I've just opened myself up to a different type of attack. So walk me through how to strike that right balance, because you also, if you remember, one of the big complaints with the trusted internet connection is that same backhauling, right? You had to go out to the internet to come back, to go back out. And that just that added latency and time. So how do you find the right balance?
Yeah, it's look, if our employees can't do their job, then we're not doing our job as security professionals, right? I mean, our job as security professionals is to enable them to be able to do their job without being compromised, right? And so we have to give them the access they have to do their job. I think you make a great point, right? The American worker is very there's a lot of ingenuity there, right? And look, from my experience, the vast majority of the time where you see something happen, it doesn't happen because an employee was malicious and said, look, you know what, I want to do whatever I can do to bring down this organization. It happens because they're just trying to get their work done, right? And so they take shortcuts or they create workarounds. And to your point, if security implements hurdles that make it too difficult for people to do their job, they have to get their job done. That's what their bonus is based on. That's what their review is based on. That's what potential promotions are based on, right? So they're going to find ways to be able to work around and do it, and not necessarily understand that the additional risk that's introducing to the environment, right? So it's critical as we look at how we implement our security controls that we always keep that in mind. That the number one requirement is the user has to be able to do their job. And look, I worked for some organizations that were very security conscious, where I had a CISO basically an open checkbook, and I could spend money on anything I wanted that I could implement. And I had regular updates and briefings to the board of directors and to the CEO and his staff. And look, at the end of the day, no matter how much somebody talks about how important security is, availability, right, and the ability for employees to do their job is always number one. So, I've been down this path where we implemented a scanning product, and someone ran a scan somewhere with the product that I implemented, and it bumped a system offline because there was a vulnerability on that system. And you know what? Did I get an award for, hey, Jack, great job, your team found this vulnerability in an old version of WebSphere before the bad guys could? No. We had to suddenly now redo all of our processes for how we could scan to ensure we would never take a system offline, right? So it's can really get in that one step forward, two step backward predicament really quickly if you start implementing controls that are restricting access for your employees to be able to do their job or causing them, just additional challenges or hurdles. It's a failed approach. We can't go down that approach. So someone has to represent users and the user's best interest throughout these projects.
Hey, that's a great place to end it. I know we could talk longer, but unfortunately we are out of time for today. So let me thank my guest. Jack Miller is the head of global professional services for Menlo Security. Jack, I very much enjoyed the conversation. Thanks for your time.
Great. Thank you very much, Jason.
I'm Jason Miller, and you've been listening to the discussion Federal Work and Cyber Risk, Two Sides of the Same Coin, sponsored by Menlo Security on Federal News Network. For more on this discussion, visit federalnewsnetwork.com and search Menlo Security.